Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Maqbool with you at Pitafi World, and with me, of course, are Raja Faisal and Farrukh Pitafi. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is reference to a very important case that has resumed its hearing today, and this is with regard to the Supreme Court Acts and Procedure Bill, which is something that the new Chief Justice of Pakistan has been hearing now. And at the outset of the hearing, he talked about how this is going to be the last one, but it seems that it won't be, since it has been adjourned once again till tomorrow morning. The important discussions, of course, are surrounding whether or not the Parliament has any jurisdiction or power with reference to amending or creating new laws for the Supreme Court, and of course with reference to the powers of the Chief Justice of Pakistan, and then of course with regards to matters that are of public interest. This is important, especially in terms of what is being discussed within the courts as well, and the kind of aspects that are taken under review, given whether or not the Parliament is able to exercise this right as well, and how we're going to proceed forward with the full court that is hearing the case, moving towards limiting the powers of the Chief Justice of Pakistan, which previously has been also criticized regarding a one-man show, in which this is going to be something that has impacted previous judgments and cases as well, and has been accused of political bias, among other things. And so we're going to be taking a look at exactly what sort of aspects and arguments were part of today's hearing, and what really is the question that is being understood at the moment, and what is going to be the consequence of these hearings. We're going to be talking about this all in detail, and also be taking a look at what the Chief Justice of Pakistan has remarked, is that the Parliament has gone ahead with this act in good intention, and this is something with regards to whether or not there is a two-third majority, the Parliament's goodwill should not be hampered. But this, of course, remains questionable in terms of the number of issues that have been raised, whether or not, despite whatever good intention or good laws might be in place, does the Parliament actually have the power to do that or not. And so we're going to try and understand what that means, and whether or not this is something moving forward that we can see will have a fundamental change in the way that the Supreme Courts work. Our next segment is going to be taking a look at what is happening in the neighborhood, with a lot of issues going on with the ICC Cricket World Cup happening in India, with a number of course, visas here also not being given to Pakistani journalists and fans as well. At the same time, we've now also seen that the World Cup presenter Zainab Abbas has now left India after a huge propaganda had started against her, with a lawyer also filing a case against her, saying that she has targeted Hindus and India on social media, and has remarked in a way that was anti-Hindu and anti-India, and this is something that has been used against her, which is why, citing security concerns, she has left the country, and she's of course now unable to cover the tournament. And this is especially important given the recent tweet that she also gave prior to the start of this tournament, where she talks about cultural similarities and bringing the different sides together, and how this tournament is able to do that. However, unfortunately, we've seen that, as before, sports is now again being brought into and mingled with political rivalries, and we see the kind of Hindutva ideology that has been targeting various journalists across India as well, and then outside of India as well, doing once again the same thing within this World Cup. So we're going to be taking a look at what that means, and who's going to take responsibility for her to be able to do her job, and of course for her security as well. For this and more, as always, in the studios, of course, Farrukh and Faisal are going to be with me for our first segment. We're going to be joined by Barrister Babar Imran, Advocate Supreme Court of Pakistan, and Barrister Usama, Ghumman, who's a legal expert. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of the discussion. And we're going to be, of course, taking legal opinion with our experts as soon as they are part of the show. But Farrukh, as we, of course, take a look at the hearing that has resumed today, of course, a lot of this was something that we discussed previously, as well as there was an in-camera proceeding that was aired for the first time, and it was something that we were all very happy to see in terms of what is going on, and there was a lot of debate also whether or not it was a good step forward. But now that we're also talking about this particular act, and the way that the arguments have been raised as to whether or not this is something that is beneficial, what is your overall impression of the way the hearing is taking place? Do you think that the full court bench is able to address what is the essence of the question here?
Right, Sarah, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think that at this moment it is not a question of whether the a full bench is actually addressing the question or not. It is essentially because it is a kind of inquest. Right now it is the lawyers from both sides which are making their cases, right? So at this moment it is essentially the Supreme Court is in a listening mode. Of course, they ask questions or give observations just to illuminate or just to clarify a point. And I think that the comment that you were referring to, particularly of the Chief Justice of Pakistan regarding two-third majority, goes back to the issue that we discussed the other day regarding delimitation that I was just pointing out. And at that time also I had actually said that we have a written constitution. That means that it should be a flexible living document, and somehow we have made it very rigid by adding so many caveats like two-third majority, especially because ours is a majoritarian system. And there, if you don't get absolute majority, if you don't get two-third majority, are you not supposed to actually pass any bill tomorrow, day after tomorrow, when the elections take place? Do you think that at that time, if you get a hung parliament and you cannot amend the constitution per se with a two-third majority, that should mean that everything is hunky-dory automatically and things are going to be just kosher the way they are? The more important thing regarding the scope of this law is that where exactly does the independence of judiciary starts and where exactly is the democratic remit. And that is an interesting aspect, Sana, because while I respect the Superior Court implicitly, my humble submission is that none of the honorable justices have been elected by the people of Pakistan. The only body that gets constant infusion of people's mandate is the parliament. So why is it that the parliament essentially, when the previous Chief Justice couldn't actually even build consensus within his own bench, and he could not have a full bench hearing at all? Excuse me. So when that was the case, and when the bylaws were not being actually spelt out, are we to think that things had to continue on automatic mode? Do we need any kind of unelected oligarchy in the country? If not, then it is essential that the power to make laws and to make rules remains with the parliament, especially when the judiciary is chief. The then chief could not do it. Excuse me. So these are the things that have to be kept in mind, and I think that so far the Honorable Supreme Court is addressing this matter very well.
All right. Let me also welcome our guests who joined us online. Barrister Usama Ghumman is a legal expert, and Barrister Babar Imran, Advocate Supreme Court of Pakistan. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And let me start with you, Barrister Usama. The situation as we see it, and you've written about it before as well, and I want to understand then, at this point where we have the new Chief Justice of Pakistan in place, and with the previous hearing also something that we saw earlier and was, of course, broadcast as well, with the way that this is being heard and resumed as a number of arguments present, what are the essential questions that the Supreme Court is aiming to answer?
You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, Barrister Usama.
He's doing it. Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for. I think Pitafi Saab has very rightly pointed out the fundamental question that concerns the proceedings is whether the Parliament has the competence of. And I think, as it pointed out, this proceeding as well and previous proceedings as well, the superior judiciary, especially the court, has consistently been asked to years to general public interest, and has failed to Parliament, and for this, a very vivid example was given by hypothetical. It is not very far from reality, by Justice Supisha in the last week. So he said, assuming that accept this argument, we cannot intervene in the matters, and what if the Supreme Court decides to take 6 months long vacation in a year, and then they say, okay, we are going to, the Chief Justice says, we are only going to work twice a week, and that too for only a couple of hours. Would the Parliament be so helpless that there would be a massive tendency and a tendency of 50 members, at least 54,000 cases in the Supreme Court, and there are perhaps 2 million cases pending in the court of Pakistan. So in that sense, I think it has been a long time coming, and bar councils, parliaments had been urging as far as I can remember since 1996. The Supreme Court Bar Association, around that time it was formed. This, the president of the Supreme Court, the Sajjad Justice, has been consistently urging the Supreme Court frame rules, criteria more visible to the people, transparent. The Supreme Court has been interfering and demanding transparency from every other organ of the state. Be it Parliament, it has examined the constitutionality of the Parliament, it interferes in executives' administrative matters every day, past fixtures. But once it comes to the Supreme Court itself, it says, and this is very surprising and also very disappointing, that they consider themselves the ultimate guardians who are beyond any sort of uh, transparent criteria, be it from the parliament or be it from bar councils. They always say, and one of the justices had consistently making this point in his proceeding, okay, uh, Chief Justices come and go, and as if one Chief Justice personal fiefdom, that he can do whatever he likes, and then the next guy comes and he does whatever he likes, and so on and so forth. So it's like, oh, it's not kingship, but it's a limited time kingship for a year, for 2 years, or for Iftikhar Chaudhry, it became like 7, 8 years long kingship. But as long as he's emperor, he can behave like an emperor. And look, there's a very redeeming feature that these are not emperors for life. And then I think this goes to the very heart of the problem too. Can Supreme Court, and especially the Chief Justice, is the modern emperor, only a time-bound emperor, he's not emperor for life. And B, can Parliament interfere if there is a clearly a mischief, and that mischief has been going on for years and years? And I think that is at the very heart of this entire debate. Apart from those nitty-gritties about whether subject to the constitution and what is law, all of these are legal discussions. The ultimate question is the parliament the ultimate institution? Is it helpless if a Chief Justice or the Supreme Court decides to go rogue? And we have seen that in recent past, Chief Justice Saqib Asad, he went insane, forgive my friends, and no one was able to do in front of him. He decides to make dam, and the entire country is going around, running around, collecting money for dam. What if the other Chief Justice comes and he says, okay, I really want to, the entire country should shift to Mars, and then if the entire country decides to go after sending Pakistan to Mars? So this is just ridiculous. The parliament, as they say about war, and I say it again, justice is so important that matter left to the left justices, honorable justices. It has been long time coming. The Supreme Court and the Judiciary is primarily responsible for parliamentary interference, and I think it is even constitutionally, legally speaking, within the competence of the parliament to Because if you see the law, it is very clear as a day, subject to constitution and law. Now the Supreme Court, you know, they say we law is what we say the law is. So they can make whatever excuses they want to, but ultimately, if a common person look at this plain English meaning, and it is very clear that the Parliament is competent to make this law.
All right. Thank you, Usama, for that analysis. We'll also be, of course, speaking in further detail with Barrister Babar as well. And Barrister Babar, of course, we understand what the fundamental aspects of this hearing is, as has been comprehensively outlined by Usama. I want to also understand, there was also a discussion around, and it seems that perhaps that sort of hesitation has also existed previously as well with the Supreme Court not perhaps being willing to or being reluctant to give up the kind of powers that the Chief Justice has enjoyed previously as well. And it seems that the question of whether or not the Parliament is able to exercise a change in any of the Supreme Court's laws is also something that is being understood along those lines. There was also discussion of whether or not a law is good or not, or whether or not this is something that actually benefits the courts. Is it still something the Parliament can or cannot do? And I want to understand then that if we take a look at what this means in terms of what is being questioned is whether or not the Supreme Court will then have any say, or will the Parliament be just amending anything at all? Is that something that is emerging out of a fear of losing a certain power, or is that actually also based in something that helps the judiciary execute justice and is not something that the Parliament is hampering with? Barrister Babar, you'll also have to unmute yourself. Yes, go ahead.
Still not audible, sir.
Barrister Babar, still we can't hear you.
We're unable to hear you, Barrister Babar. Can you try again, please?
You have to unmute yourself, sir.
I think you already did that, but can you try again? Unfortunately, we're still unable to hear you. Okay, I think
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay, well, if you see, there's a British saying which says that if the British Parliament legislates that all the blue-eyed babies should be considered green-eyed, should be considered green-eyed. So the first and the foremost thing which has to be kept in mind is that legislature, the whole trichotomy of powers is so strong that the Supreme Court cannot get into legislation. Why is the Supreme Court hesitant? The Supreme Court is hesitant because it has seen again and again, whenever the Supreme Court declares law invalid or ultra vires of the Constitution, the Supreme Court shows a lot of restraint. Now, in this case, if I go back a little, just a month back, there was an anticipatory injunction passed by the Supreme Court against a bill which was not even enforced by the Act. And an anticipatory injunction was issued by the Supreme Court saying that even if it is assented to by the President of Pakistan and even if it is signed, even then this will not take force. Now that is something very unusual around the world because legislature has a lot of power. Now what has the legislature done? I feel that what the legislature has done is just trying to regulate the powers of the Chief Justice. One of the major questions that we have before us is whether the Supreme Court means the Chief Justice of Pakistan or the Supreme Court as a whole. What they did was to define that court, they put in a commission. So any show motor action under 1843 has to go to a committee and decide whether we should take that petition as the fundamental rights for it. That is taken up by the Supreme Court, and then there is a debate going on as to whether the rules of the court would be changed by the Parliament or not. Now we have to consider a few things. Number one, the foremost legislation of the country is the Constitution itself. Then there is an act, and then there are rules. The rules made under an act by the Supreme Court in 1980. Now there is another act in place by uh, a total legal, valid, elected uh, parliament, and the act was enforced. And now there is a debate going on that whether parliament could do that or not. Well, as far as I am concerned, as a student of law, parliament is actually the body who will make the acts. I think personally, in this situation, the parliament can enact the law, and the Supreme Court has to change their rules accordingly. This act is passed where it says that the Chief Justice of Pakistan can take suo motu action. In consonance with two other senior judges, the Supreme Court should accordingly amend its rules instead of trotting towards that path where they are completely taking over the role of parliament. This is not their role. Their role is to interpret the law. That is why there is so much hesitation.
All right. Faisal, when we take a look at what is going on, there's of course also a lot of concern that is being spoken about with regards to the Constitution being supreme, and the fact that the Chief Justice has also remarked that he's also a slave to the Constitution. And this is something that we all understand, the supremacy of the Constitution. But at the same time, what Farrukh also keeps on referring to is the fact that it needs to be a living document and is not something that is just set in stone or in a way that sort of restricts us. It's supposed to empower us and be able to create the space that is needed for the system to function properly. At what is being at the point that we're discussing what is happening in terms of the powers of the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice, do you think that a lot of that is also emerging from a point where perhaps there is a lot of rigidness in terms of sticking to what has been or what has been the norm or the case traditionally, rather than understanding what is needed in terms of the appropriate way of actually going about with the business of the court?
And Faisal, by the way, one more question. Can you clarify whether a living document on life support is a living document?
That's a perfect question you've asked, and I think this is the question which we, being Pakistanis today, everyone needs to ask ourselves whether it is there or not, and whether it is doing what it is supposed to do or not. First of all, Sana, I'll come to
So is it or is it not?
He's very sharp.
Yeah.
He won't give you the answer.
He just evaded the question.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll leave it up to the viewers to decide whether it is or not. Sana, if we talk about Constitution, of course, Constitution is supreme. Why I say this? Because in an ideal scenario, in an ideal democracy, what we talk about and what we are supposed to do, everything is in the hands of the will of the people. It is entirely up to the people to decide how they want their country to be run. And of course, if they want the country to be run through a constitution, and that constitution, of course, it is being designed in where? Legislature is going to do that. So ultimately, the legislature is the one who gets elected by the will of the people, and they are the ones who actually design the laws, design the constitution for masses at large. And probably this is what Supreme Court's Chief Justice, he's been trying to highlight, that whatever Supreme Court does, they are of course bound to follow that. But here is the question which I keep on asking myself. In an ideal democracy, if there is something going on in the parliament in terms of legislation which majority of the people out of the blue do not agree with, then what does the system say? Then what does our election commission says? Why I keep on asking this question from myself? Because I have seen the successful democracies of the world. What happens is that whenever there is something which is of huge interest of the masses, then masses are asked for that before parliament does something. And of course,
I don't understand. Are you speaking about referendums?
Referendums on special basis, on special.
Which country are you referring to, apart from Switzerland?
Yeah,
this model, this direct democracy is in Switzerland. Where else is it?
Where else? Well, I'm talking about the Britain as well. In Britain, you would always see that there is, if there is, of course, a matter of concern for the masses, then of course, I'm talking about Tony Blair's government. Of course, I remember that when they were, trying to jump into Iraq war, then there was a huge debate.
No, but that is an executive matter, right?
Yeah, it is.
But we are talking about lawmaking and legislature's power.
Lawmaking and legislature's powers. Here I would come towards that anything to do with the administration, anything to do with the country's policy, of course, people of the country, masses, they are asked in a democracy.
Yeah, that is executive's domain.
Yeah.
That is not parliament's domain.
That's what I'm trying to highlight, that in a democracy, in an ideal democracy, the people, will of the people is supreme, which actually enables our legislature to reach or legislative assemblies.
But let me actually work with that premise of yours and try to understand it according to what we're talking about today. So in the scenario that we're debating and try to understand, given the powers of the Supreme Court and the Parliament, what should have been done in terms of getting the opinion of the masses?
What should have? Well, the only thing is elections. Elections is the one that can actually ensure that the right people are in the Parliament.
Hang on. Just clarification. I'm seeking clarification.
Yeah.
When this law was made, at that time there was a parliament in session which was elected by the people of Pakistan.
It is.
So do you suggest that there should have been a new election before that, and then you could go for the legislation?
Farrukh, I would talk about the will of the people here. If we
so parliament
prima facie, as a term of law which always keep on using people, especially the lawyers, they keep on using prima facie. What we actually observed was that the parliament, of course, there was too much going on in the parliament. There was too much politics within the institutions as well, and sadly, there was too much politics within the institution of judiciary as well at that time.
So who should have decided that?
So
who is the judge of that? No, who is the judge of that? That there is too much politics and there should be a new election.
People.
How?
They demand. If they were demanding, if the majority of them they were demanding, then it should have been accepted.
Faisal, the system is already in place to make sure that the will of the people is actually respected and carried out by the parliament, which is why it exists, right? Okay, but let's move ahead with what is happening in terms of the hearing and this particular bill. And Farrukh, I want to understand that there were a number of questions that were also raised regarding whether or not if this particular act is also passed, then it may actually bring about perhaps even further ways in which the parliament might want to or would act in ways that hamper the powers or jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. And I want to understand whether that possibly is the case. If this act is actually passed, will that then eventually possibly lead to scenarios such as some that were presented in the courts today?
Yeah, so what we are essentially saying is that the parliament would get taste of blood. So it will go for more killings, right?
Basically.
I mean, let us not, devolve things to such a primeval, level. Frankly, Sana, the nub of the gist of the problem is the same. It is sharing of power, right? Trichotomy of power is important. What is trichotomy of power? There are three pillars of state: judiciary, executive, and legislature, right? They all have their own domains, their own, sphere of influence, and they should actually stay within their own lane. This is the argument that is made, right? Now, the biggest issue is, again, going back to what kind of country do you want to be? Do you want to be a constitutional monarchy? Do you want to be a constitutional dictatorship, or do you want to be a constitutional democracy, right? In democracy, what is the best method of gauging what people want? That is their representative parliament, right? Now, I understand that, all of the constitution cannot be changed. I understand that in every society you have to address two very critical elements. One is stability. That means there are core values which cannot change. You end up with what is called basic structure theory of the constitution. And then the elements of the society which address change, because things keep on changing. Technology changes, time change, people change, right? So you have to address that. There comes the capacity to amend the constitution and change laws and make new laws as well, right? In that domain, essentially, you have to look at what you call parliament. This time, what has parliament done? Has the parliament said that we are taking these powers away from the Supreme Court of Pakistan or judiciary? Not at all. All they have done is that there was absence of leadership. There was a vacuum of leadership, so to speak. There was a structural, vacuum in the system, and that had to be actually filled. The concentration of power in the hands of one man. Essentially, remember, the judiciary already has a lot of power. On one side, it can, of course, take suo motu, original jurisdiction cases, especially 184.3, and through that, it can actually interfere in the matters of executive. Similarly, because they have judicial review, they can also, second guess or change or object on the laws that are being made as well. But then, Sana, if this argument is going to be, this territoriality is going to be preserved, what is going to happen? Supreme Court says, but this is my domain, don't even come close to it, right? We have all the powers, they are actually enshrined in the Constitution. Then the executive says, look, we have the control of the system. Who is Supreme Court of Pakistan or who is judiciary to dictate us? Legislature, we saw already, was really ready to fight with judiciary during that time. Then what happens, Sana? There are other powers which have actual power. Army is going to say, look, we have got all the guns. So we have the actual power. Why shouldn't you listen to us?
Yeah.
So either you can devolve into this tribal system, or then you can actually, keeping in view of keeping in mind the territorial integrity or jurisdiction of various spheres of influence, you can at least help them when they are incapable of helping themselves. There are times when judiciary will be needing help. There will be times when executive will be needing help, ergo 184.3. And then there will be times when the legislature cannot move forward and the parliament, judiciary has to nudge it. You can have all these things, but it will actually be reached through dialogue, not through fears.
Right.
And this whole idea that somehow if they are allowed to do this much, which was right, then they will start doing what is wrong. I'm sorry, when those bridges come, then we'll talk about them. Right now, it is not illegal.
Right, and Barrister Usama, I want to build on that and talk a little bit more also with regards to what was discussed in the court today with reference to whether or not if there is a violation to access to justice, or if the Supreme Court somehow is not able to guarantee access to justice to somebody in a particular case, will the Parliament then be able to intervene? And I want to then understand in terms of accountability, whether there was also a question of whether if the Chief Justice makes a mistake and the Parliament correct it. I want to understand then, given these scenarios where what a particular institution is meant to actually be doing and it is in violation of that, the other is there to check it. For example, if the Parliament is able to amend a particular law or act and then of course curtail that power, where does this sort of accountability actually then end? If the Supreme Court or the court judiciary is in the wrong, what then if the Parliament is in the wrong? Who then holds it accountable? What if the establishment is in the wrong? Who then holds it accountable? And then how does this entire system then work and ensure in a way that there is accountability for all? Usama, you'll have to unmute yourself once again. Yes, go ahead. I'm unable to hear you.
No.
Yes.
Now we can.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a very deeply philosophical question. Perhaps Pitafi Sahab is more into Greek philosophy. There's like this classic problem in Greek philosophy: who will guard the guardians? And there's no solution if you are looking for a foolproof system, human wisdom, centuries have told us they not be a foolproof system. Instead, what we have as human beings over we devise our systems, which in modern uh, democracies called checks and balances. So these are has been a discussion today, also several times about the separation of powers. But separation of powers is an idea in modern democracy, constitutionalism that has another side too. It's like two sides of the same coin. One is separation, and the other is checks and balances. These both ideas, concepts go hand in hand. What it essentially means, there are spheres of activities of each branches of government, one being parliament, the other being executive, and third being judiciary, but they also keep a check on each other. And due to a very simple human experience that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, they don't want to give absolute power to any one institution. Having said that, there's also a corresponding wisdom of democracy and collective human wisdom, and which is that ultimately there cannot be any foolproof system. And if there has to be one ultimate guardian whose powers are some by other institution, and that institution that embodies the collective wisdom of our democracy, people, and that the parliament itself. That is not premised on the idea that parliament can never be wrong. But the premise is that the likelihood of parliament going wrong is less than 17 judges being crazy or one chief executive, primarily dominated by prime minister is a guy. So one guy or 17 people, it's better that there are 340 members, and then if you add 100 members of the Senate, so it is better the wisdom sits in hand of, let's say, about 450 people rather than in the hands of 70 people. So that is the ultimate wisdom, and there's no proof that these people cannot go wrong. But that is the central premise of democracy, that is a democracy that you have to accept that the parliament is the ultimate repository. And if the parliament decides to go wrong or become authoritarian or wants to harm interests, then a nation and the people cannot be safe. So that because that ultimately means take down of common rules of the society. So the constitution, laws, and democracy work not because there is the constitution is a piece of document. There's a law that says okay,
Right.
and hence going to come out that law or constitution and start going to fight everyone who is going to violate it. They ultimately work because majority of people in a society, in a country, they want to abide by it. They are not always looking forward to or scheming how to violate or how to cheat law. Those countries and
All right.
democracies cannot function who do not agree with the basic premise, and that is to follow the
Right, absolutely. Barrister Babar, you can add to what is being discussed, and I'd like your take on it as well. But add to that what the Chief Justice remarked with regards to this particular act by the Parliament, talking about how it has been passed with good intentions. And while that may be the case, I want to understand how exactly is that something that that the Chief Justice was able to conclude.
There's a lot of going on. Right now, we have to understand the whole Supreme Court as a full bench. 16 judges are sitting. I think around 55,000 is pending in the Supreme Court right now. And today, the whole day was taken by all of those judges. They are deciding this one case. And as far as Article 191 of the the Constitution is concerned, it says subject to Constitution and law, Supreme Court may make regulating the practice and nature of the court. Supreme Court gets that power from the Act, and a valid Act part which is right in the case. It is very important to know that you Act, the rules and procedures, there is also one of the very basic things, which is that if there is an major matter, it has to be fixed before the Supreme Court in 14 days. In this scenario, right now, we filed cases in the Supreme Court, and trust me, for good 1 year, there is no hearing of those cases. We filed every application. There is no hearing of those applications. So I feel that this act that has been passed is defines power of the Supreme Court in a better way.
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much, Barrister Babar. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Barrister Usama, for being a part of the discussion as well. We're going to quickly also take a look at what is happening as part of the ICC World Cup, which unfortunately is seeing a lot of discrimination, and we've now seen it happen with Zainab Abbas as well. And this is something, Faisal, that is very unfortunate and condemnable, and the kind of propaganda that is being launched against her by citing very old tweets of hers, and the way that she has also cited her security concerns puts us into question of whether or not an international tournament such as the ICC World Cup is able to guarantee any sort of security for its own official presenters, and then what sort of responsibility is there on the country, the host country, that is part of the tournament.
Well, Sana, if we talk about country as a host country, of course India needs to prove that it is World Cup people are playing there, not India Cup or something like that. And if we look at this particular case, of course, Zainab Abbas, when she goes there, the case is about, tweets which were made around 10 or 12 years ago, and that was at that time, of course, it was must have been a reaction to some incident that took place. We know India is known for these kind of, hate-filled acts which keep on going in India. So at that time, if she did do it, then she posted something at that time, and there was Mr. Jindal, and a lawyer. He just simply went and lodged a complaint against her, and now of course she was getting threatened. So simply what BCCI does is they obviously advise her to leave the country, and that is how she has left the country. It is highly unfortunate that this kind of tournament of a global reach is taking place in a country like India, where of course these kind of incidents they keep on taking place. Mike Atherton, who happens to be former captain of English team and a commentator as well, he himself has shown concerns about it, that if this kind of behavior we are seeing from the Indian side coming, then we need to think about future prospects of India taking all of these World Cups and all.
I want to understand what now then. What now happens with her case?
Number one, we still are not sure whether she actually tweeted something of that sort. She has denied it, right? The second thing is we have been looking, going through all her tweets. We haven't been able to find those tweets. They could be fake tweets. You know how India's politics works. My biggest beef is that India keeps on telling us that we treat guests as gods. So there are lesser gods perhaps. That's why if they are from Pakistan, that's how they keep on doing it. My understanding is that she is coming back. She has come back, or she is coming back. She has, or she's on her way back, and that's about that.
No consequence for all that happened that she had to go through?
Yeah, so far, whatever you keep on pointing out, whatever India does, India gets away with murder again and again. So this is the duplicity of international standards, and that will continue for some time, but hopefully one day there will be consequences.
So now very, very quickly, I just wanted to mention one liner. More cultural similarities than differences. This is what she had to add. This is what she tweeted when she reached to India. This is what this time when she reached to India first time. Then she tweeted that there are more similarities. I hope now she knows that similarities are not there.
Yeah,
Alright,
Atma Nirbhar Bharat is petty Bharat.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be discussing the case of Zainab Abbas in the next hour as well, and Faisal is going to be part of that show as well. So our viewers are going to be having much more of Faisal in the next hour, and particularly, of course, on this case. But of course, this is something that is very tragic, very unfortunate, very condemnable, and we hope that a tournament such as the ICC World Cup is able to take cognizance of this and actually do something about it and compensate Zainab Abbas for what she's gone through. That's all that we have from the debate. Thank you, Farrukh. Thank you, Faisal,
Thank you.
for being part of the show.